Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really fascinating argument from William Hannah Thompson's book, The Great Argument. We're going to focus in on his chapter about the messianic prophecies. You see, he argues that we're talking centuries in advance, the prophet Isaiah laid out this incredibly precise and deeply paradoxical blueprint for one of the most influential figures in all of history.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this powerful claim from Thompson. He's basically saying that the life of Jesus wasn't just some random series of events. No, he's arguing it was the fulfillment of a really detailed profile written hundreds of years earlier by the prophet Isaiah. And this wasn't some vague fortune cookie prediction. We're talking about a multifaceted portrait so specific that it really demands our attention.
So what is this blueprint exactly? Well, Thompson points out that Isaiah doesn't just give us one picture of this future Messiah. Instead, he presents two completely distinct and honestly, on the surface, totally contradictory portraits of this coming figure. One is a king, and the other is a servant.
First up, let's look at this portrait of a glorious, triumphant king. In chapter 9 of his book, Isaiah describes a ruler who would come and establish an eternal kingdom of justice and peace. This is a figure of immense power and glory.
Right away, Isaiah connects the birth of a child to this incredible scope of his future rule. But what's really fascinating are the names that are given to this king. These aren't just titles, they're really descriptions of his very nature, his character, and his authority. Let's break these down for a second. Wonderful, Counselor, that points to some profound wisdom. But then it gets way more specific. The mighty God and the Father of eternity. Those are straight-up claims of divinity. It suggests a ruler whose authority isn't just earthly, but it's transcendent, it's everlasting. And then the Prince of Peace, the ultimate source of a true, lasting peace. This is a portrait of nothing less than absolute divine sovereignty. But, just as we're getting a really clear picture of this triumphant king, Isaiah pivots hard. In chapter 53, he paints a completely different image. This is not a king on a throne. Not at all. This is a humble, rejected servant who's experiencing the most profound kind of suffering. The language here is just as specific as the king's titles, but the tone? It could not be more different. This prophecy details a life of pain, of rejection, where the servant isn't conquering his enemies, but is instead taking on the punishment for the wrongdoings of other people. The contrast here is just stark. This figure isn't ruling, he's being crushed. He isn't being celebrated, he's despised. He isn't establishing some great throne. He's being cut off out of the land of the living. It is a portrait of complete humility, total sacrifice, and suffering for the sake of others. So, this brings us to the central puzzle, the big question that Thompson really highlights. How can both of these be true? Is the Messiah a glorious, eternal king? Or is he a humble, suffering servant? How could one person possibly embody both of these completely opposing destinies? Think about it. On one hand, you've got a divine ruler, an everlasting father. And on the other, a man of sorrows, who is literally cut off from life. For centuries, this just seemed like an impossible contradiction. It was a prophetic riddle with no apparent solution. So, how was this puzzle solved? Well, according to Thompson, this ancient paradox finds its perfect resolution in the historical figure of Jesus. He argues that the unique arc of Jesus' life, his death, and his resurrection is the key that finally unlocks Isaiah's riddle. Thompson lays this out in a really clear three-part synthesis. First, in his life and ministry, Jesus absolutely acted as the king, the light of Galilee, teaching with divine authority. Second, in his crucifixion, he became the suffering servant, despised, rejected, and wounded for our transgressions. And then finally, in the resurrection, the two portraits merge. The triumph over death validates his kingship and establishes that eternal, spiritual kingdom through his followers. And this all leads us to the very core of Thompson's great argument. See, it's not just that Jesus fulfilled a prophecy, but that he fulfilled an incredibly complex and seemingly impossible set of prophecies. The very difficulty of the blueprint is what makes its fulfillment so compelling. For Thompson, this isn't about connecting a few lucky dots. It's about a single life that precisely matches a detailed, contradictory profile that was written down 700 years in advance. He argues that the odds of any one person accidentally embodying both the triumphant divine king and the crushed, suffering servant are just astronomically low. And this is the thought that Thompson really leaves us with. He challenges us to just consider what it all means.
What does it mean if the most influential story in all of history wasn't just lived, but was first written, contradictions and all, long before it ever came to pass? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.